The Milwaukee Bucks head into the playoffs with quite a bit of momentum, and we got some numbers that'll surprise you just how good this team has been for an extended period of time. We dig into that and to bid farewell to an old friend once again on the latest Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for continuing to check out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. If you have not done so yet, you can still sign up for free at lockedondaily.com and get your day started with the all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter. We had the career game for Pat Connaughton yesterday, Camille, and the stat that was floating around, 2 of the most 40, 10, 5 games in Bucks history. And then you had 1 Chris Middleton, 1 Pat Connaughton. So there's just good vibes and a lot of momentum going into the playoffs. And, you know, that's really the place to start this week and this discussion as a whole is, look, the big part was you didn't have Giannis last year, and that's going to temper all of our expectations. But even outside of that, the overall vibes and feeling and the eye test that we've seen from this group, not just with the 8-game win streak, but beyond that, it's night and day in terms of the difference from where it was a year ago.
Truly. I mean, when you think about how the Bucks ended last season, going 3-8 down the stretch over their last 11 games, and this year it's the complete flip of that, going 8-3 over their last 11, and some kind of poetic symmetry, I guess, with this season alone of starting 2-8, finishing 8-2, which highlights again just how up and down the season has been. But even with those ups and downs, it feels like a really tight-knit group in this particular Bucks locker room. You've seen guys, even when they're on the bench, supporting the guys who are in the game. You've seen Taurean Prince when he's not in the game for late, game situations, when he's not closing, he's still standing up, talking to his teammates, encouraging them, coaching them up. Seen him doing that in particular with AJ Green a few times. You've seen Dame, who hasn't been able to play with the blood clot situation, on the bench, really bigging up KPJ, cheering him on, being his mentor, cheering him on. It's been a team like that all year, and to see them being able to stack wins at a really important time of the year as you're heading into the playoffs, being able to build that momentum, I think it's been really good for this team to have those vibes. Like last year, they were a team that believed in themselves, even though the season didn't end the way they wanted it to. And this year, they feel like a team that's believing in themselves, but also starting to figure out how to put some of their best ball together under some new situations of not having Dame out there.
Yeah, I mean, and even Bobby Portis being the calming presence and voice of reason for Kevin Porter Jr. It feels like it's a group that fits together. And I think too, and look, we're going to get into much more than high-level conversations over the offense and what's changed and Giannis and his role. Let's not do the Bucks are better off without Damian Lillard, because you're still going to need Dame for a deep playoff run. I think if anything we've learned, hey, here's maybe how we need to ask Damian Lillard to play and how he needs to fit in around Giannis, that this works. And if you got this guy off the ball as one of the more lethal shooters in NBA history and his presence in late game situations, like that's something you want to have. But it's been important to see that development from Kevin Porter Jr. and Ryan Rollins. The big piece is just centering back to Giannis. And this has kind of become hey, this isn't 1A and 1B. This is 1. And then there's Dame. And then there's everybody else.
And I don't think it's a negative thing to say that either. Like when Dame got here, you heard the conversation of Dame, we need you to be Dame. We need you to be Dame. And we've heard Dame saying, I need to adjust and figure out how I'm playing next to somebody like Giannis. And during this stretch here where Giannis has been able to have the ball in his hands a bit more, it has made me think about the way that teams tend to play Damian Lillard, and Dame talking about himself of, hey, I do enjoy playing off ball a little bit more. And he talked about Kevin Porter Jr. being the guy to unlock that for him and being excited to see what that looks like in the playoffs. And seeing how the Bucks have been playing over the last, 2 weeks now with like Point Giannis being that guy, I don't think that you want to have your team entirely constructed that way, where that's your only ball handling option. But if it swings back the momentum where it's like a little bit more of the decision making is going to continue to be in Giannis's hands, even when Dame comes back, could be a really good formula for this Bucks team going forward, because we've seen how devastating Giannis can be when he's able to be that person who's using his gravity, getting downhill, kicking out to guys, knowing where they are. And it could be an interesting wrinkle to try to get Dame in a little bit more of those second and third options and letting him cook from there.
Yeah, it's been an important evolution. And I mean, there's a lot of Bucks fans that are thumping their chests and saying that, see, I told you so, because of the another tiresome argument, but the Giannis versus Jokic with the MVP conversation. And I think what we've seen is, look, this is not to take anything away from Nikola Jokic, who is clearly one of the all-time greats. So is Giannis.
Thanks.
But you see, okay, if Giannis was asked, and frankly, Giannis has had better teammates than Nikola Jokic. If Giannis was asked to shoulder what Nikola Jokic has, these are the numbers you'd see for Giannis, and they have matched or topped what Nikola Jokic has done.
Yeah, and then the point that Bucks fans love to point to, and I agree with him, it's like also what Giannis is able to do defensively. And I personally loved hearing Giannis earlier. I think it was earlier last week.
I think it was
just talk about, like, he thumped his chest a little bit of, like, you look at all the top scorers in the NBA and like what I can also do defensively. And I know, like, I'm one of the top guys in the league. And Giannis always talks about being humble and just taking a day at a time. But I love when Giannis gets in his bag and he starts talking that talk of, like, do you know who I am and what I can do? And honestly, that piece of it is what gets me really excited for this Bucks Pacers playoff series, because it feels like it's going to be a big Giannis series, because he is the lone superstar here. As we know at this moment, not with no updates on Dame's health or anything, but it feels like it's going to be Giannis's show to run here. And I think he's going to remind a lot of people about who he is and what he can do when those lights are bright, because we've been watching him this year, the last few years, and over the last couple of weeks of how his play has elevated with him having to be that primary guy. But playoff time with those lights bright, the NBA Cup was kind of like a preview for me of, like, man, I miss being able to watch Giannis healthy, competing for something. And we finally got to another playoffs here where Giannis is going to be healthy. And I cannot wait to see what that looks like for this Bucks team, and seeing him kind of thump his chest and remind people of, like, I am one of the best players in the NBA, and he should be the best player in any conference in the East here.
And, I'm glad you brought it up, because that is the other piece of why I don't think you can say this is a better team without Damian Lillard. I mean, outside of the obvious that he's one of the 75 greatest players of all time, but in that same post game where Giannis gave that quote, he himself said, I can't be as, I forget the exact wording, but essentially engaged and as dominant defensively with how I've been asked to play offensively now without Damian Lillard, that I'm shouldering so much on the offensive side. I don't have quite as much to give defensively. So that's another piece why, look, you're going to need Giannis's defense too. And getting Dame back to at least give Giannis some wiggle room in that sense is going to be big for this team on the defensive end.
It is. And I think that's why over the last few weeks, like the faith in Kevin Porter Jr. being like, whoo, I got someone who I can lean on has been great. And Kevin Porter Jr., as we know, he's going to play a big role come playoff time. But Dame is an established guy who you've seen in the playoffs. You've seen him do it before. Kevin Porter Jr., we haven't seen how he looks as a 16-game guy. So that's going to be new for him. And just having more options is never bad, especially when one of those options is a top 75 NBA player. And honestly, I think that Dame had a better season than some people are giving him credit for as well before the blood clots came. Like a very solid season. I thought he looked a lot more comfortable this year in Milwaukee than he did last year. And this is a team that's constructed around Giannis and Dame. So, like, yes, I think Giannis alone can carry you for a bit, but the team is going to be at its best when you have both of those guys that the role players were brought here to be playing around.
So we got quite a bit of optimism for this team, as we mentioned, the eye test and how they've looked in not only the 8-game win streak, but beyond that. And there are some numbers to back that up, and numbers that, frankly, even I was surprised by, and taking a look at a very large sample size for this Bucks team. So we'll dig into those numbers coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Spring is here and life is busier than ever. Between work, family, and everything in between, who has the time for grocery shopping and meal prep? That's why you use Hungry Root. It makes eating healthy, delicious meals simple and stress-free. Hungry Root is like having your own personal shopper and nutritionist wrapped into one. They take care of grocery shopping and meal planning, offering personalized recommendations based on your tastes and health goals. You'll love Hungry Root and how they tailor your orders based on what you like or don't love. It gets smarter every time. With their high quality, nutritious food, you can stick to your gut friendly, high protein diet without spending hours planning. The meal comes together in 15 minutes or less, giving you more time for workouts, family, hobbies, NBA playoff basketball, even WrestleMania this upcoming weekend. So it frees up all the time in the world. Take advantage of this exclusive deal. Get 40% off your first box plus a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA. That's hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA for 40% off and a lifetime free item. All right, Camille, I was thinking about this the other day, and I think we've all kind of looked at I won't say crunch the numbers because there's no number crunching. It's updating filters and clicking apply. But I think we were all like, hey, the Bucks have been pretty good since this date during the win streak everybody's pointed to. We've all liked to cite, look at what the Bucks have done in April. And granted, it's 8 games, so pretty small sample size. But in looking at that record yesterday and what they finished with, you go back to the 2-8 start, and then you start to do the math in your head and think, well, wait a minute. How does this rank among teams in the league? If we just take this date where the Bucks played their 10th game, from that point on, how did everybody else perform across the league? And I got to tell you, Camille, I was stunned by these numbers. So we'll put it up there now for those watching on YouTube that you can see. But since that 2-8 start, the Bucks won 46 games, which was the 5th most in the league. It would have been the 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. But in that scenario, you would have gone into the final day of the regular season with a chance at the 3 seed. The 115.7 offensive rating, 9th best in the league in that stretch. A 112.3 defensive rating, 10th best. And a net rating that was also 10th best in the league. So by the numbers, and this is a 72-game sample size. It is not small sample size theater here. By the numbers, the Bucks have basically been the same level of dominance that we've seen for the last handful of years now, if you take out that disastrous 2-8 start. And the big thing, Camille, as I mentioned, they would have went into yesterday, if this was a 72-game schedule, with a chance at 3rd. I mean, if you went even 4-6 in your first 10 games, you're the 3 seed, right? If you go 5-5 or 6-4, who knows where you're climbing up there in the standings. So that was really the big part was, man, look at how much that 2-8 start really did to you to hold you back to the level that it did.
To think about the fact that if they went 4-6, like you just said, like that's a 50-win team.
Yeah.
Like it's a different scenario than what you're facing right now. And the best thing that came out of that 2-8 start for the Bucks was, I mean, the young guys getting back into the rotation, but also just the fact that the rest of the East was struggling at that time. So at least the ground that the Bucks, had to catch up to wasn't as great, because only was it Cleveland and Boston were playing well at that particular time. So you had some time to catch up. But to see those numbers after that 2-8 start, to see that for the rest of the season, they had been a top 10 offense, top 10 defense, top 10 net rating. And that's the area you want to see for a team that's going to be looking to compete for a championship. And I think when you watch the Bucks night in and night out, you live with the ups and the downs and the flows of the seasons. And we've heard the players mention, like, hey, losing streaks are going to happen over a course of an 82-game season. It's just going to happen. And when you live through those ups and downs, you can kind of lose sight of that big picture. But to see that that's where they rank after that start, they have finished a lot stronger than what they started. And the last couple of weeks here of seeing them just rattle off 8 straight wins is kind of like, okay, again, the momentum heading into the playoffs feels so much better this year than it did last year, even though it's going to be another familiar opponent for this team. And the team looks a lot different this year than it did last year. I mean, shoot, this team looks different post-trade deadline than it did before the trade deadline. So it's a Bucks team that's gone through a few different iterations so far this year. And they have found a way, as you just pointed to with those numbers, to play some pretty good ball overall, even with the low points that they have come this season.
Yeah, and those numbers that we just referenced are from NBA.com. If we use cleaning the glass and take garbage time out of it, it's even better in some areas, a little bit worse in others. They still have a 3.4 net rating, still 10th best in the league. They're the number 7 offense since it, or not just since the 2-8. In the final 72 games, they're the number 7 offense in the league, which again is closer to what our expectations were. 15th in defense, which again, closer to what our expectations were coming into the season, when I think the general assumption was this team can finish somewhere around 5th in offense. And if you can finish in the top half of the league defensively, we'd all be thrilled. That's what they've done if we take garbage time out of the mix in the final 72 games here in the last 2 weeks, too. So the 8-game win streak and that loss to the Atlanta Hawks, they are the number 1 offense in the league. Now, defense has a little work to do, but again, it just backs up seeing, okay, funneling things through Giannis. This is starting to look like the offense that we envisioned here.
Yeah, and I think part of it comes with some trust too. Like when Dame went out and Giannis talked about just having the trust of knowing where his teammates were going to be, it made me think back to like the start of the Bud era where it's, the blue squares are on the court. And that's exactly where he's thinking guys are going to be. But him understanding where he needs his teammates to be and them understanding, hey, when I'm on the court with Giannis, he's going to be expecting for these particular spots to be filled in. So as he's moving, we're moving alongside with him, just making sure that we're in his vision or we're in a spot on the court where, if a pass comes through, it can get there. He's going to trust that it's going to be there. So that trust factor between Giannis and his teammates as the season has gone on has continued to increase. And I think you've seen that too with some of the assists that Giannis has been able to rack up over the last 2 weeks of just some of them seem like blind throws of like someone's supposed to be on this part of the court. So I am going to toss the ball here and trust that someone is there, and that understanding seems to be there for him. So I think that playmaker Giannis paired with the fact that you have gotten really good contributions from your bench over the last few weeks, especially with Bobby Portis returning, Gary Trent Jr., Kevin Porter Jr., AJ Green, like the returns have been really good for this Bucks bench. And I'm not really used to saying like the Bucks have had a good bench, but they've been putting up some points recently, which has been helpful as well. And Bobby coming back, it helps a lot of the equation.
They were 19th and 26th in offense and defense in those first 10 games, 24th in net rating. So yes, it has been a much, much different team. Now, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. If we look at in those 72 games, the biggest area of opportunity, and frankly, the biggest area that you need to see that traction in the postseason is against the best teams in the league. And over those 72 games, the Bucks just went 5-13 in those games. They had the number 25 offense. Defense was still consistent, 15th best. But those areas are what you're going to need to see movement on because of the teams that you're going to be playing in the postseason are all theoretically going to fit into those top 10 buckets.
They're going to fit in those buckets, and you're also going to need to make sure the execution is sharp. And that's the piece of it for the Bucks with me of like, it's not the regular season anymore. It's no longer, a random Tuesday in Utah and you just got to go out there and hoop. So maybe you're not as, strong on your rotation, or maybe you're supposed to rotate this way, but you guys in the corner, you're like, you know what? I'm going to let him shoot that one. I'm going to hope he miss and try to get this board. Those moments are going to have to decrease as the playoffs come, where it's like every possession, you have to take it seriously. You cannot take possessions off. Being tight, being sharp, being on the string on defense, talking, executing switches properly. Like for the Bucks, it's on them for a lot of it of just executing properly, knowing where you're supposed to be on the defensive end as well, and make something out of that. Because as we mentioned, we'll talk about the Pacers all throughout this week. We even put out a call to listeners if they have any questions about this series, drop them for us. So if you have any, listen on YouTube, drop them in the comments as well here. And it's going to be a test against this Pacers team, but I think that the Bucks have shown things throughout the season that give you confidence in them being able to pass this particular test against the Pacers.
It is certainly going to be a test. It was a testy season for our old friend, as there's been a lot of updates across the league on this first day of the offseason for some teams, and that includes our old pal Mike Budenholzer. So we'll get into the latest in Phoenix and one interesting tidbit that one of our colleagues at Locked On had to say in terms of potential destinations for some big names out there. We'll get into that conversation coming up next on Locked On Bucks. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about it. When was the last time you had a service emergency? If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. That's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system designed to streamline and scale your customer communications all through an app on your phone or computer. Maybe you use two phones. Well, with Open Phone, you can manage business calls and texts from one app, whether you're at your desk or on the go. You can use the shared inbox as well, where your team can jump into any conversation without missing a beat. And they have AI call transcripts and summaries that save you time on follow-ups and ensures you never lose track of customer interaction. Open Phone is offering our listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That's openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you're switching from another service, Open Phone will even port your existing numbers over at no additional charge. Again, get 20% off for your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Camille, a lot of change came today across the league, and this was arguably the worst kept secret in the league, but I got to tell you, I'm still, even though we kind of knew this was coming, I'm still somewhat left in shock that the Phoenix Suns have fired Mike Budenholzer. So this is now going to be 4 coaches in 4 years for the Phoenix Suns. I saw a stat too that this is the 8th coach. This will be the 8th coach that Devin Booker has had in his time in the league. I mean, look, you never want to see anybody lose their job, and especially the connection that Bud has to this city. We talked about how complicated and frankly bizarre the matchups with Phoenix were and Bud's return to Milwaukee. But I'm sure there's still a lot of Bucks fans, if not all, that have Bud in a special place in their memories here, that it's tough to see him lose his job after just 1 year for his hometown team. But I mean, I wonder what's next for Mike Budenholzer to go from fired in 2 straight jobs. Didn't really leave Atlanta under the best circumstances based off some of the people with the Hawks that I've had a chance to catch up with. And it didn't seem like it was great in Phoenix either. That I don't know. I mean, I don't expect him to be coaching in the league this upcoming season. He's got 4 years left and he's getting paid on.
Listen, if I was Bud, I'd enjoy having 4 years.
4 years of vacation.
Yeah, I'm taking 4 years. I'm chilling with the family. We still in Arizona. It's up, but no, seriously. Like you said, I wasn't surprised given the reports that we've heard out of Phoenix, and I think that if it was just the record alone and like they didn't have a great year, but Bud had the locker room and there weren't all these other things going on, the likelihood of him remaining in Phoenix would have been a bit higher. But from the reporting that has been coming out, it seems as if there was just some contention behind the scenes with Mike Budenholzer and the players on the team and just how all of that was working. And when you don't have that locker room buy-in piece of it, it tends to be hard to justify bringing them back. But to have fired your 3rd straight coach in 3 years, that, like, I know people praise the new Suns owner for like his aggressiveness, but sometimes aggressiveness is impulsiveness. And at times those can lead you down roads where you have to continue compounding bad choices on top of other ones because you're moving so quickly. But for the Bud situation, like I said, the locker room was lost and it's a little bit different there. But if you have a locker room that the coach has lost 3 years in a row, there's some questions that need to be had at that point too.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I think we all can say this much. Bud can be a bit rigid. And I think that's ultimately what a bit is a bit of an understatement, but I think that's probably ultimately one of the biggest undoings is you think back to Atlanta when, not to take anything away from players like Al Horford and your guy Jeff Teague too, and some of the others that really shined for the Hawks, but for the most part, it was role players. There was no superstar or even star level player on that team. They had the year with all the all-stars, but that was it. And Milwaukee, Giannis was not an MVP yet. He was just coming into his own. And we heard Bud at the introductory press conference talking about unlocking Giannis, and that was his pitch in the job interview. And you saw these young players develop, and you remade your roster too with the additions of guys like Brook Lopez and how important he was and continues to be, by the way. But that was not the case in Phoenix. When you're walking into an older roster with one superstar, one guy that at one point was a star. I don't know where you would label Bradley Beal anymore at this point. Devin Booker, who's not on that tier of superstar, but a high level player. It's just not the same scenario where I don't think you have the availability to come in and be quite as rigid and say, nope, this is what we're doing, because of what those players have been through. In the case of Kevin Durant, experienced in terms of success without you.
I think that there are some coaches that are better suited to coaching certain types of teams. And that's why when I see coaches that are able to coach various types of teams, whether that's a young team that's, still trying to find itself, being able to coach a team with a bunch of vets on it, team with the superstars, it's different types of teams and different types of coaches who tend to work better with certain situations. That's why, like in Miami, I always give credit to Eric Spoelstra, because it's like, I've seen him coach various types of teams and find ways to get success out of them. And that's difficult to do. And this could be a situation going into Phoenix where, again, like you mentioned, the voices that you have to, honestly, at this point, coaches have to kind of cater to some of the voices in the locker room to a certain degree. So it can be a difficult job. And going forward for Phoenix, I'm definitely going to be tuned in to Locked On Suns, because I'm just curious of what that next step looks like for Phoenix going forward, because they have seen as a team with like the highest payroll, and not to make the play-in or playoffs, like that's not acceptable. So it's like, what do you move from after this? Because it seems like Devin Booker is going to continue to be in Phoenix, but what else is going to be around him at that point going forward?
Yeah, and I think the other thing, and the last thing to touch on with Bud before we transition to that personnel move we referenced, you look at the coaching staff that he had too, and that was the other big thing to me, was only two of his assistants from Milwaukee, Vince LaGarza and Chad Forcier, were with him in Phoenix. And you look at the guys that he had in Milwaukee, and even before that in Atlanta, that one by one, you peeled away from that coaching staff. When you think about guys that were a part of it way back when, that are head coaches in the league, or were head coaches in the league now. Darvin Ham's back in Milwaukee, and we heard in the summer that Bud reached out to Darvin, and Darvin said, no, I'd rather go back to Milwaukee than go out to Phoenix. Charles Lee's the head coach of the Charlotte Hornets. You lost Taylor Jenkins years ago after 1 year in Milwaukee. So it's just been one after another, losing these guys. Kenny Atkinson and Quinn Snyder were assistants of Bud way back when too. I think that was the other big thing. Was, I'm not going to say it wasn't a strong staff, but it was a different staff, in that in Milwaukee, I think what you got the sense of was Bud, as we talked about being rigid, he could be the dad that always says no and be the bad cop. And you had Darvin and other guys that were going to be like, all right, well, I'll let you do it. I'll tell your mom that I said this was fine, and things like that, that you had that guy to play off of and have that relationship with the players. And not to say that there wasn't that in Phoenix. I know he had David Fizdale, but I don't think it was what he had in terms of the support system here in Milwaukee, and even before that in Atlanta.
It's a good point to bring up. I'm still just surprised the Suns season unfurled the way that it did, like in many different ways, from the defense falling off of a cliff. I thought that Bud was going to come in there and really be somebody who kind of just table sets for the Suns, kind of like how he did for the Bucks, of like, I'm raising your floor here, and we're going to be a really good regular season team. And it did not pan out that way for him. So unfortunate for Bud, but at least he gets to continue to collect that check. And it'll be interesting to see what happens next with Bud, if he continues looking to coach elsewhere, or if, he goes in a different direction, or if we just don't hear from him for a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've granted very limited, but I have experienced Mike Budenholzer personality much different than the guy that we get in press conferences, and know that's in there. That I don't think he'd be bad on TV and as a part of a studio show. So I am curious if that's his next move. But yeah, if I were him and I had 4 years of guaranteed money coming my way, I'm going to take most, if not all, of those 4 years and enjoy my time there. And that's the other part of this, Camille. The date that we referenced of the Bucks are 2-8 on this day. The Phoenix Suns were 8-1 on that day. So they've basically been the inverse here, where the Bucks, we went through fifth most wins in the league from that point forward. The Phoenix Suns went 28-44 the rest of the way after that start that they had. So very, very different tales for those two teams. I mentioned there was an interesting tidbit that was on the Locked On NBA show earlier today. They dug into the Bud firing as it was just happening. And the obvious pivot is to Kevin Durant. As we've all talked about, it was kind of the assumption Bud was going to get fired. It's a bigger assumption Kevin Durant is going to get traded. Mm-hmm. And the question was, well, where are the landing spots that make sense for him? Matt Moore, who you can catch on Locked On Denver Nuggets, suggested the Milwaukee Bucks as a team that has contracts and type of players you could kick over to the Phoenix Suns in exchange for Kevin Durant, that they were on his short list of teams that made sense for KD. So when you hear that, what is your reaction?
I have a few that come to mind first. The first one is that I don't know if you follow the the Zodiac GM on Twitter, or if you even believe in astrology, but he did say Kevin Durant, Zodiac wise, fits perfectly on the Bucks, and I find that account it's just so funny to me. But that stood out to me in the sense of also just thinking of like what do the Bucks look like then? Like, what is the next phase of, Giannis and Milwaukee, the next phase of the Milwaukee Bucks? Is it for the rest of Giannis's prime, rest of Giannis's window? We're going to just kind of look to get other superstars and try to plug them in here and see if this works? Or have they seen something this year of like, hey, kind of getting some younger athletic guys might be a way forward if we can just keep this Dame Giannis thing going and we can just kind of build it around that way. It's a question fundamentally of just what is the best way to build around Giannis while his window is still open here in Milwaukee. And I am not sure if an older Kevin Durant does that. Like, the name appeal of it alone is there. The idea of Giannis and Kevin Durant sharing a court together on the same team sounds crazy. But I don't know if it's the most sustainable way forward for the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, and I was going to reach out to Matt and like, what do you mean by this? And shed some more context on it, because just digging through the cap figures here, there's an obvious name that would come up in the trade when you got to match that much money for Kevin Durant, and that player makes more than KD. The Phoenix Suns are in the second apron by a lot, so they can't aggregate contracts. So that makes it very complicated. And as we saw with the Bucks, you can aggregate if it gets you under the second apron. I don't know what the trade is that's going to bring the Suns under the second apron, save for trading like 6 guys for one player. So that's the complicated part of it. But as we've seen the last couple of years, and even with the Bradley Beal component, Camille, no contract is untradeable, as we've seen, where you constantly say, well, nobody's going to want that. We see that contract moved. So I'm not going to say never, but hearing that was certainly interesting of, where are you guys headed with this one?
Yeah, that's the exact same reaction I would have to that. I'm like, I don't know about it, and I don't know if that's the way you want to continue to try to build the team, but it's an interesting thing. And I'm sure that John Horst, being the GM he is, he'll make the call and try to get an understanding of what could be in play here, because that's what you're supposed to do. Pick up the phone, figure it out, but I don't know the likelihood of it.
Yeah, leave no stone unturned. We didn't mention it either, but very late last night, we learned the date and time of game 1. So we're still waiting on the rest of the series. I would expect that comes Wednesday. I was looking back last year, and that's how they handled the drop for the entire series. So I was caught off guard that, wow, we got the the whole weekend slate. The game one's released already here, but the Bucks are going to be in Indiana on Saturday in the first game of the playoffs this year. The Bucks and the Indiana Pacers. So Saturday at noon is game one of this series, and then again, I would imagine late Wednesday night we'll get the rest of the dates for the Bucks and the Pacers. By that timeline, Thursday maybe, that the series will shift to Milwaukee for game three. So maybe we're looking at a Thursday, Saturday, or Thursday, Sunday for the two games in Milwaukee. But that'll do it for today's show. Leave your thoughts on the situation in Phoenix, on that conjecture too of does Kevin Durant make sense in Milwaukee, and your overall level of optimism with this Bucks team as we move into the postseason. Those numbers that we shared too of where the Bucks rank since the first 10 games. How surprising is that to you? We picked apart smaller sample sizes, and the Bucks have done this since this date, but the full 72 game view, one of the 5 best teams in the league, and by the numbers, one of the 10 best teams in the league statistically. So leave your thoughts on that. As well, as we mentioned, we're going to have a show with the two of us and Frank digging into your questions for the playoffs coming up a little bit later in the week. So leave us your questions to address for that show, and we'll get a Pacers preview as well from our pal at Locked On Pacers, Tony East, heading into the weekend. But that'll do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.